another question is, do you think that it's possible for people to switch to a pivot block too soon?
Yeah.
Like, are those down weeks really an indication to switch it up, or are those down weeks just your body's natural way of quote unquote deloading, and there's probably going to be an upswing behind it? Where if we're talking about fatigue, maybe fatigue and these dips in performance, they don't seem like they're proportional because we're looking at them in one-off snapshots. But if you took a step back
Mhm.
and looked at more of a broader pattern, you probably would see a little bit more correlation. How do you know when to switch it up? I know
Well,
you don't, but
the heuristic, start simple, and then we'll go back into the into the esoterics of training, I guess. But my heuristic is, uh, especially for the first training block, 2 down sessions. So, if you're that type 1 responder, everything's getting better, and then all of a sudden there's a 1 down session, maybe that's just a blip, and sometimes it is. But then if there's a 2nd down session, then I think it's not worth the risk, so I think of it like a risk reward type thing. It might be that we could keep it going and it'll turn around, and it probably would at some point, but I think there's risk in that. And at least I always like to reference the Bondarchuk dogma, really. At least according to him, is that once you hit this peak condition, if you keep going, you kind of bounce around between dips in performance and then back up to a peak condition, but you don't really go much past that. Now, I mean, the whole notion of like Bulgarian style 1RM, like repeated 1RM training is that, right? That eventually the trend line is going up, although there's got to be a limit to that too. And then the question is, like, what's going to make it go up faster?
well, you could also say that there was just selection bias. Whoever happened, that maybe that system just happened to be the best system for a particular set of athletes, and those are the athletes that survived.
Yeah.
When you say
Yeah.
two sessions, do you mean 2 subsequent training
Yeah.
workouts,
Two
or do you
two
mean
microcycles.
two? So maybe potentially 2 weeks,
Right. Right.
or
Which
depending
is,
on what you're doing. But
Too
so
bad.
what I yeah. So what I've found is that there's kind of a feeling that athletes associate with that peak condition. For me, it's boredom. Like, training is interesting, it's fun. I look forward to my training, but I know that once I hit that peak condition, I'm like suddenly very bored with it. Like, I just don't want to do this anymore. So some sort of novelty introduction helps with that. It's that for a lot of people, but for others, it's like Isabella describes it as, like, in the beginning, she feels you like in week 1 you feel good, excited to train, but then you start the training process and you're not in a peak condition anymore. So the performance is bad. So there's kind of this dissonance that happens. It's like, man, I want to be here, but then I'm screwing everything up. It sucks. But then in week 2 that improves, and you kind of go through this thing of gradually improving. And she says for her, when she's coming close to the end, she starts to feel very, very strong, but also a bit fragile. Like, she doesn't want to get out of these certain movement patterns, and then peak condition. If we were to keep going, it would be like a performance decline. And I've had other lifters who they get feeling really, really beat up. Like, they're telling me, hey, I'm afraid that if I keep going, like, I know my performance is good, but I'm afraid if I keep going, then I'm going to get hurt. And that's not worth it, So, okay, this is where we're going to pull the plug for you, and that's kind of how I've based it.
it takes a lot of work on the coach's side.
Yeah.
You got to really be in tune.
Yes. I think that's like the benefit and the main detractor, right? That I think this works great if you're a coach that's switched on, that is attentive, that frankly has some knowledge to bring to the table. it's creative problem solving. So if you have nothing behind you, like you don't have any experience with this at all. Like if you ask me to build your website, I don't know how to do that. Like I'm going to have zero problem solving capability. You have to have some requisite variety behind you, and I think that this really highlights that, because you're stripping away all the framework that fills in a lot of those gaps for you in a more traditional planning model. Like a traditional planning model, we say, well, the intensity is going to gradually rise. It's, the volume is going to gradually decline. And now you say, get rid of that. You tell me what to do. Are we going to increase the intensity or decrease it? Or maybe it's the same and we're just going to change movements. You tell me. If there's no planning paradigm to fill in those blanks, then it puts a bit more pressure on whoever it is writing the training.
I think
but that's where that relationship between coach and athlete becomes so super, super important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I really like to lean on athlete input for that too. Right. Say, hey, I'm really torn. You've had equally good responses to this exercise and that exercise. We need to pick one. Do you have a gut feeling? And if they do, then I see no reason not to go with that.